You are listening to the Primitive Intelligence Podcast, episode 608, Men in Black. Now, I figured since a couple episodes ago I did a whole episode on black-eyed kids, black-eyed children, I figured I'd jump right in and do the Men in Black as well. There is some crossover. Some people think that the black-eyed kids are like an offshoot of the Men in Black and vice versa. But in the stories I came across today, I don't really see that. But we don't really know, so it's all open to interpretation. I've got a couple other cool episodes I'm working on, a lot of information in those, so I'm taking my time with both of those, and so Men in Black, really easy to find information on. Figured I'd hit them up today, and that's what we're going to talk about. So this episode of the Primitive Intelligence Podcast starts now. Men in Black. They are a widespread cultural phenomenon and a set of reported encounters with mysterious individuals who allegedly visit or intimidate people who have claimed to witness UFOs or encountered alien beings. These individuals, often described as wearing black suits, sunglasses, and displaying odd behavior, are said to appear unexpectedly to dissuade witnesses from discussing these experiences or to suppress information about UFO sightings. Now, some of the things that you will probably associate with Men in Black is their appearance. Like I said, commonly described wearing black. Not always, though. A very striking appearance. Sometimes very human-looking. Sometimes kind of mannequin-like in their appearance. They may exhibit unusual behavior, such as speaking in a robotic or monotone manner, lacking the understanding of human customs, or displaying knowledge of personal details without explanation. They also like to use intimidation tactics. It's one of their favorite things. It's kind of why they're around. The Men in Black encounters are often characterized by attempts to intimidate or silence witnesses of UFO sightings. This may involve threats, coercion, or attempts to discredit the witnesses' accounts. And then there's also debate on what their allegiance is. Are they government? Are they extraterrestrial? Some theories suggest that the Men in Black are affiliated with government agencies or secret organizations. And sometimes people believe that they are either extra-dimensional or alien. There's really no concrete answers on any of these. And some of these stories will support both sides, all sides of who or what they may be. So what I'm looking at today was a book called Men in Black, Evidence and True Stories About Earth's Most Mysterious Cover Agents by Conrad Bauer. A link will be in the show notes if you want to check this out. There's a lot more in there than what I'm going to cover. But I'm just going to go over some of the bigger stories I saw in here. And we're going to start with the very first Men in Black encounter. According to this book, and from what I can tell, it is the actual first Men in Black encounter. This is also known as the Maury Island hoax. Now, the individual involved was Harold Dahl, and he was interviewed, and in his own words, he said that on June 21st, 1947, in the afternoon, about 2 o'clock, I was patrolling the east bay of Maury Island. I, as captain, was steering my patrol boat close to the shore of a bay on Maury Island. On board were 2 crewmen, my 15-year-old son, and his dog. As I looked up from the wheel on my boat, I noticed 6 very large donut-shaped aircraft. His story goes on to say that one of these 6 craft started spewing what looked like newspapers. It was like this kind of lightweight white sheet. There was a bunch of them coming out of this, and then there was also like lava rocks coming out, like hot lava rocks. These spilled onto his boat. They caused damage to the boat, broke a crewman's arm, and unfortunately killed his son's dog. This was investigated by a few different people. He had made reports. The crew backed up his claims. And then 2 military intelligence officers a Lieutenant Brown, and a Captain Davidson took over the investigation. They interviewed people. They started investigating some of the claims. They even collected some fragments that were claimed to have come from this UFO. Here's where it starts to get weird. After they did their investigation, they gather up their findings and they get on a plane to fly back to California to kind of sift through everything and bring more people into the investigation. They never make it to California. Their plane goes down. Both men are killed in the crash. At this point, the FBI takes over the investigation, and they conclude that it was a hoax. And their reason for this is because it was getting a little bit heated for this Harold Dahl. He didn't want the attention. He didn't want to be involved. So he started telling them, I'm going to tell people it's a hoax because I just want to get out from underneath this. So they said, it's a hoax. So this event took place around the same time that the first UFO flying discs were being reported over the Pacific Northwest back in 1947. And it's interesting what happened after this. Dahl said that afterwards he was visited by a strange man dressed in black. He seemed completely out of place, but projected immense authority when he spoke to him. He was visited by this man several times, and each time this bizarre man in black told him to forget about what he saw and stop talking about it. It took several visits, but eventually he just started backing away from it and claiming it was all a hoax. That is the first story of a man in black encounter. Now, you could look at this both ways. You could say, well, okay, so he was intimidated into saying it was a hoax, or was it a hoax and he created the men in black as a way to get out of it? We don't really know. But it didn't stop there. The encounter that kind of set the norm for what men in black encounters wind up being from here on out, from the 1940s, 1950s on out, happened in 1952. The witness was the founder of the International Flying Saucer Bureau, or the IFSB. It was a private group. His name was Albert Bender. He had a brief stint in the military during World War II, and upon returning home, he became interested in the UFO phenomenon, starting the IFSB, and then also starting a publication called the Space Review, where people would send in stories of their sightings, and he would do his own style of investigation and writing articles, things like that. It was like a newsletter kind of a publication. After running this publication and this IFSB for a while, one night he gets a phone call. He goes and answers the phone, and there's no one on the other end. But he immediately gets this sense of foreboding. And this is something that happens over and over. This was reported with the black-eyed kids. They get a knock at the door, and before they'd even open the door, they just get this sense of fear. This happens to him with this phone call. So something just doesn't feel right. He keeps saying hello, hello, hello. Even though no one's answering, he feels like there's someone on the other end of the line. Then he starts to feel sick. He starts to feel dizzy. And he just hangs up the phone and he goes to bed. Puts it out of his mind. Gets up the next day, goes about his life. I don't think it's specified, probably a few weeks later, but just sometime later. He was on his way home from the movies. This is something that he would like to do to clear his head. He'd go to the cinema by himself, watch some cheesy, hokey 1950s sci-fi movies. And he was on his way home from the theater, but the whole time that he's walking back, he feels like he's being followed. He's getting this sense of foreboding, like the feeling he had on the phone. He doesn't feel so good. He turns. He doesn't see anybody following him. He doesn't see anything, but he just knows he's being followed. So he picks up the pace. He gets home. He gets to the door. He goes in, closes the door behind him, locks it. And his bedroom was up in the attic. He goes up to this attic bedroom, opens the door, and smacked right in the face with this overwhelming scent of burning sulfur. And then right in front of him, he sees this dimly lit, glowing orb just floating in front of him. And he flicks on the light real quick. The orb disappears. And he's thinking to himself, did I just imagine that? You know, I was watching these sci-fi movies. Thought I was being followed home. He thought he was going to get mugged. But he's like, am I just in my head? And then he looks around and he notices that his room is ransacked. And all of these files that he has on these stories that people subscribe to his newsletter and from this IFSB, they're all strewn about like somebody had been reading them. And there's this lingering smell of sulfur. And he's a little disturbed by this, but ultimately cleans the stuff up. There's no one in the house. The orb's gone. Chalks it up to nerves. Moves on with his life. A few weeks after that, he goes back to watch another movie. He's sitting in the theater, watching whatever movie it is, it's not specified. And he starts to get this feeling that he's being watched. And he gets this overwhelming feeling of dread and oppression. And someone is watching him. He doesn't like the feeling. He starts looking around. Now, there's not many people in the theater, but the people that are in there are watching the screen. They're not looking at him. They're watching the screen. So he's kind of looking around, looking left and right, looking behind him, looking ahead, just trying to see if there's anybody that might be staring at him. And then all of a sudden he notices there's someone sitting next to him. And in this book, he says, it's like they were there. They weren't there 1 second and they were there the next. Now, it doesn't say if he was staring at the seat and the guy just popped into existence, or if he like turned real quick and then looked back and he was there. But there's this gentleman sitting there and he's wearing a long black trench coat. He's got a black fedora hat on and he's just staring at Albert. And the one thing he notices that's really weird about this guy is that his eyes are kind of glowing. And he can't tell if it's just like reflection from the movie screen or if this guy's eyes are actually glowing. And he starts getting a headache. He starts feeling dizzy. He starts getting nauseated. And he closes his eyes for a second. And when he opens his eyes up, the guy's gone. And now he's like, am I hallucinating? Did this guy have enough time to get up and walk away while my eyes are closed? He kind of looks around. He doesn't see him anywhere. He's like, all right, something's really weird here. He turns. He looks back at the movie screen. He's watching for a few more minutes. That feeling that he's being watched comes back. He turns around. This guy's sitting right behind him now. And this guy is just burning a hole through him with his eyes. He's just staring at him very aggressively, angrily. He starts to feel sick again. And he says, you know what? I'm done. I'm out of here. Left the theater. Rushed back home. Put it out of his head. He's like, you have no idea what's going on. He's now kind of assuming this has something to do with his UFO research, but he doesn't let this deter him. So over the next few weeks, month or so, he gets the idea that possibly these, the occupants of the UFOs, he doesn't really know who these guys are who are dressed in black, but the occupants of the UFOs that must be flying these craft, they must be telepathic. It doesn't explain how he came to that conclusion, but he says they must be telepathic. So in his publication, The Space Review, he encourages readers to set aside about an hour on March 15th to mentally reach out to the ETs for contact, saying that this has never been attempted before by a group like ours, and not everybody was behind it, but some people are like, yeah, we'll give it a shot. So what he said was, he gives them basically a script. It's a few lines. Memorize this, and then on March 15th, in your mind, just keep repeating this and see if we can get contact. And I'll read some of what the script was, I guess, for lack of a better word. But it said, calling occupants of interplanetary craft that have been observing our planet Earth. We, of the IFSB, wish to make contact with you. We are your friends, and would like you to make an appearance here on Earth. Your presence before us will be welcomed with the utmost friendship. We will do all in our power to promote mutual understanding between your people and the people of Earth. Please come in peace and help us in our earthly problems. Give us some sign that you have received our message. Be responsible for creating a miracle here on our planet to wake up the ignorant ones to reality. Let us hear from you. We are your friends. Now, this was meant to be memorized and then mentally repeated on March 15th. See if they can make contact with the extraterrestrials. Now, I did not know this, but about 10 years later, this objective, this call to action in this newsletter of the Space Review was used as a basis for a song by the Carpenters. The song is called Calling Occupants of Interplanetary Craft. When I saw this in the book, I was like, I've never heard of this song. I looked it up. You can find it on YouTube. It's interesting. But it definitely uses parts of that calling, of that memorization, that call out to the telepathic occupants of the extraterrestrial craft. It does cite that, which I thought was very interesting. So on March 15th, when the time came, Albert went to his room, lay down on his bed, closed his eyes, and started repeating this in his head. And on the third time of repeating it, he noticed a drop in the temperature of the room. He got a massive migraine, and then he passed out. When he woke up, he was having an out-of-body experience. He was surrounded by blue flashing lights, and he was floating above his body. And he heard a voice tell him that they had been watching him and that he needed to stop looking into the secrets of the universe, or they would visit him. And it was not like, hey, we're going to come see you. It was a warning. This was not the friendly experience that he had hoped for. The voice also said that they had a special assignment and are not to be bothered by the people of Earth. And they said, we are among you and know your every move. So please be advised, we are here on your Earth. Albert then wakes back up in his body, and for a split second as he was waking up, he thought he saw a man dressed in black standing beside him. For the next few days, he was nauseated, he was unable to eat, he felt physically ill, and he had trouble sleeping. Now, fairly certain that people would think he was crazy if he told them about what happened when he did this mantra in his head. He decided he's going to keep it under wraps. He just wrote down the experience so he would stay fresh in his mind. He writes it down and he puts it in his safe. And a few days later, a couple weeks later maybe, he decides, you know what? I'm going to release this in the Space Review. I'm just going to put it out there for people. And what happens. He goes to the safe. He opens it up. The papers are gone. He's the only one that has a combination of the safe. The papers are gone. But there's a lingering smell of sulfur coming from the safe. So a few weeks later, he has a dream. It's very similar to his out-of-body experience during his contact mantra. And this time, the difference is that he can actually look around. He's a little bit more in control. And as he looks around, he sees the blue flashing lights. But he can see three beings standing in front of him, dressed in black. These look very much like traditional men in black. And they speak to him. Now, I'm not going to... There's a whole back and forth that they go through, so I'm just going to paraphrase this. Basically, they say, we know you are really interested in us, but we also know that you're a nobody on your planet. So no one's going to believe anything you tell them about us. So we're not worried about you, but you make the perfect contact just for that reason. We've got a job to do. And sometimes people get too close to us and it costs them their lives. Sometimes people get too close to us and more or less we wear them as a disguise. We can also shapeshift. We'll contact you at a later date, but what we're going to do is give you a token that you can take back with you. You have to hide it, but it's so you know that this contact was real. We won't tell you our names, but you can address us. You can address us as numbers 1, 2, and 3. He wakes up in his bed. He's got this bizarre piece of metal in his hand, and he immediately resigns from the IFSB. He shuts down the U.S. chapter, and he steps away from it all. And he basically says, I'm leaving. I'm shutting this down. I got visited by 3 men of authority who convinced me that further investigation would be a detriment to my life. And that was it. He was done. Some of his friends were really surprised, and they had no idea. They'd heard a couple of the stories, but they didn't really know if it was really that serious. But there was also a chapter of the IFSB in, I think, England, and I'm not sure how long that one went on for, but there's also one in Australia. And the head of the Australian chapter was Edgar Gerald, and he had many conference calls with Albert. He had heard all about these stories. He probably had the most information about these contacts that he had. And he decided, I'm going to keep going. I'm not shutting down. I'm going to keep this thing going. And then he gets visited by Men in Black. And he notices that they're just sitting outside his office in a black Cadillac. And he'll look out the window, and regardless of where the car's sitting, they're just staring right at him through the window. And this happens for a while. We'll see him there every once in a while. Look out. They're always staring. No matter where he is in the building, they're staring right at him. Then, a little bit later after that, he starts to experience poltergeist activity in his home. Objects being moved or disappear and show up somewhere else. But it all came to a head. I don't know how long. It seems like, the way they're talking, a few weeks, maybe a couple months. This all comes to a head when he's in Sydney, Australia. He's in a mall, and he gets pushed down the stairs by an invisible force. And he just takes this as, okay, it's time to stop. He resigns, shuts down the Australian chapter of the IFSB. And that was the end of that. But this interaction, this kind of archetype of these guardians of knowledge who want you to stop thinking about it, stop looking into it, this becomes the norm. So the next story I want to cover from this book is the story of the Solway Firth spaceman. This story you may actually know about. If you've ever heard any of these stories, you've probably seen the photo. Now, the Solway Firth is a body of water between Scotland and England. This took place in May of 1964 when Jim Templeton, his wife and daughter, went to the nearby Berg Marsh, which is right by the Solway Firth. To their knowledge, they were the only ones there that day. His wife and daughter were picking flowers while he was testing out his new camera. They're all having a good time, just some family time out. They get done. Now, this is back in 1964, so no digital cameras. You have to go get film developed. So he drops off his film, and when he goes to pick it back up, the woman at the counter says, "Oh, your pictures turned out really great. It's too bad that one of the best ones, you got that guy walking around in the spacesuit behind your daughter." And Jim's like, "What? There's no guy in a spacesuit there." And she's like, "Okay, but it's too bad he got in the picture." And he's like, "What?" So he opens up the photos and he looks at them, and sure enough, and this is the picture you've probably seen, there's a picture of a young girl sitting in a field. There's little flowers all over. And behind her, there's what looks like a man in a spacesuit looking over her from behind. Freaks this guy out because he's like, there was nobody else there. There's no way there was someone staying there. I would have seen it. So he's looking at it. His family looks at it. His friends look at it. They can't figure it out. So he winds up taking the picture to the police because now he's like, is there some kind of testing going on there? Maybe we shouldn't have been there. Is there like an escaped lunatic running around? Like, what is happening? So he goes to the police, shows them the photo. The police are like, don't know what to tell you. We don't know what this is. They send it to a special investigator. They can't figure it out. They're like, we don't know. Then it kind of becomes public knowledge. The media gets a hold of it. UFO enthusiasts start throwing out theories that it's an explorer from another dimension, and they move through time so quickly, like hopping through seconds that only the shutter of a camera could capture. Like there's all these wild theories. Now, just the picture alone, because it is a bizarre picture if you've ever seen it. And as I was reading this in the book, I'm thinking, I remember seeing where someone had pretty much figured out, and I don't want to say debunk, because the photo is real. It was not manipulated. It wasn't double exposed. There was no such thing as Photoshop back then. It was a real photo. Something was photographed, but no one knew what it was. So a few years ago, I believe it was a few years ago, someone was like, look, it's probably this. So I looked it up and I found a really good video that explains this, and I'll put the link to it in the show notes. So there was, and I forget who it was, came out and said, 95% sure this is just his wife. And maybe she was ducked down behind the daughter, because there is another picture in this roll of film from that day where his daughter and wife are like on their hands and knees in this field picking these little flowers. So she may have been crawling around looking for these specific flowers. And then he doesn't realize she's right behind the daughter. He goes to take the picture. As he snaps his shutter, she stands up, because it looks like she's kind of either brushing herself off or like stood up and like kind of stretching her back. You can see her elbow is out a little bit. And people say it can't be. The height doesn't match. She would have to be floating in midair because of perspective, and it doesn't explain why she's wearing a mask, because it definitely looks like there's a helmet being worn and it's a white suit. But this video that I watched really shows this really clearly. There is a photo, like I said, that shows his wife kind of on her hands and knees picking these flowers. Now, it's kind of, I don't know if he bumped the shutter as he was turning, because nobody's in frame. The picture's kind of crooked. But it shows she was wearing a light blue dress that was sleeveless. So at her shoulders was where the dress ended, and her arms were bare. She was very fair complexion. Very, very fair complexion. So what this guy does is he takes this photo and he deconstructs it. So he through Photoshop, he takes the daughter out and he takes the spaceman out, and then he recreates what would be behind them, and then he puts them back in, and then he kind of moves the daughter over to show where the body of her mother would be if it was her mother, and he overlays, I don't know if it's a picture of Jim's wife, or if it's just a stock photo of a woman wearing a dress to show like the proportions, but it absolutely, she would be tall enough, she'd be at the right height for the spaceman to be his wife, turned around kind of with her arm out. Now, she was such fair complexion, and the dress was a light enough blue, but if you look at the photo, you can actually see where there's the edge of the dress over her shoulder. With the sun and the angle it was, and the camera probably wasn't, if it was new, chances are he didn't have the exposure and everything exactly perfect, and he wasn't really trying to get the wife, who he didn't know was there. He was trying to get the daughter. So when he snapped the picture, she stood up, the camera got her. She looks all washed out because of the way the sun is, very fair skinned. And it only leaves the question of the helmet, because she had dark hair. She wasn't wearing a hat. She wasn't wearing a scarf. She was wearing nothing on her head. So the guy in this video goes through the historic astronomical data for the day that they were at this Berg Marsh, and sees that the moon would have been in the waning gibbous, I believe, or waxing gibbous, I forget which one he says. But at that time of day, in that position, it would have been about like 27 degrees above the horizon, and he scales it to the right image, the right size, and he overlays it, like he takes the white out around her head, if it was her, and then he puts the moon where it would be, and it lines up perfectly. Now, it could either be the moon or there's also clouds in the sky. So it could just be a cloud that's in the right position. But to me, at least, after seeing that and the way this guy explains it, I'm pretty sure the first spaceman is just Mrs. Templeton, who popped up not realizing a picture was being taken, and maybe she ducked back down to pick some flowers, or she just walked out of his field of view and he never even saw her there and took the picture. Much more plausible than a spaceman. But what does this have to do with Men in Black? Even if, well, I'll just say this was his wife. But no one knew at that time what the picture was of. So if nothing happened, if there was no spaceman, it doesn't explain. Maybe it's just belief. Maybe if you believe enough that this happened, then these Men in Black show up. Because after all this happened, they get a call later in the summer from this quote unquote investigator who really wants to talk to them about this. And they agree because Jim just wants answers. He wants to know what this is a picture of. He doesn't care if it's an alien spaceman or if it was a blimp flying by. He doesn't care. He just wants someone to be able to say this is what it was. So he agrees to let these guys come over so they can talk to him and get all the information and try to get some answers. Well, a couple days later, a black Cadillac pulls up in their driveway and out pop two Men in Black. And they come walking up the door asking questions. Now they've got the black suits, the black ties, the black hats, the full 9 yards. And they ask a bunch of questions. He's answering the best he can. And then they insist that Jim gets in the car with them, drives over to Berg Marsh, and they show him what happened that day. And for some reason, he agrees. He doesn't know why. He just felt compelled. So he gets in the Men in Black Cadillac with these two creepy Men in Black, just okie dokie, gets in the car with him, and they drive over to the marsh. And they ask him all kinds of questions. Where was your daughter sitting? Where were you? What angle were you holding the camera? What were you looking at? What were you wearing? Like all these little questions. Then they start asking, what were the exact weather conditions? What was the wildlife around? What was the behavior of the cows and goats that were nearby? And he's like, what? I don't know. And then they go from questioning him to flat out accusing him. Who's the man in the suit? Where did he go? How much did you pay him? Who is it? We know you're involved in the hoax. And they start getting really aggressive. And they just start barraging him with these accusations. And here he is standing in this marsh, basically by himself, with these two Men in Black, with nowhere to go because he didn't drive. And they're just berating him. And I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't see anybody else there. It was just us when we were here. I didn't see anybody in a spacesuit. I don't know who this is. These are the answers I'm trying to get. And the two Men in Black stop. They turn, look at each other, shrug, and then one of them quietly says, "Oh yeah, right." And they turn around, they get in their car, and they drive off. And Jim's just standing there like, hey, you guys gonna take me? What's going on? And he tries to chase them, but they just drive away. And now he's got to walk miles back home. So you get the weird behavior. They kind of trick you or seem to be able to control people into helping them or doing what they want. And then the intimidation factor kicks in. They start with the accusations in the weird way, the weird questions they're asking, and then just the weird way it ends. So if it was just his wife in the picture, why are these Men in Black showing up? Was there something else going on in the area and they thought maybe he caught a picture of it? Or do they not know what's going on and they're investigating it? Like, there's a lot of possibilities with these. Now, that story was fairly aggressive for the Men in Black, but the next two are just downright threatening. We'll go next to the story of Peter and Sandra Taylor. They were driving home at night and saw this large melon-shaped craft landing next to the road up ahead of them. They see other cars driving by it, and it's just lit up. And as they approach it, they can see these other cars are kind of driving past, and they can't tell if they're even paying attention to it, but they can see that it's emitting all these colored lights, just like dancing across the surface of this thing and just flooding out from this craft. And then on one end, they see what looks like a door starting to form. It's kind of forming from the center out. And Jim's driving, and Peter's driving, and they're going pretty slow, but he stops the car because they're just in awe. And he's looking at this thing, and his wife's looking at it. And she opens the door and starts to get out of the car. And this snaps him right out of it. And he's like, "What are you doing?" And he grabs her. He stops her from getting out of the car. And he takes off. And he's like, "What were you thinking? And why were you going to get out of the car?" And she just says, again, "I felt compelled to get out of the car and walk towards it." She's like, "I don't know why. That's what I was going to do." So they drive home. And on their way home, they talk about it. And they decide, we're not telling anybody. We're just not going to talk about it. We're just going to move on. It never happened. So the next day, they go about their business. They're coming home the next day. And they get to their house. And there's a squad car sitting in their driveway with 2 police officers, or people impersonating police officers, waiting for them at their house in their driveway. And as they pull up, and they kind of look at them, as soon as they look at them, the one officer says, "Do you have anything to report?" And Peter and Sandra are like, they're super confused because they didn't call the cops. They haven't told anyone. They assume this is about what they saw, but they haven't told anybody. They never called the cops. And they just kind of say, "We don't know what you're talking about. Did something happen? Something we should be aware of?" And these officers, they're not happy that they're not getting the answers they want. So they just keep asking, "Do you have anything to report? What did you see?" And Peter and Sandra just kind of, "Look, are you charging us with a crime? If not, you need to get off our property." They get past the officers, they go in their house, and they start to think about it. And they figure, you know what, the next day, we're going to call the police. We're going to file a report. So that's what they do. They call the local police and say, "Look, we had an incident the other night. We'd like to file a police report. Can you please send over an officer?" Way too quickly, in an unusually short amount of time, 2 officers show up at their home. This time, no. These officers know everything that happened. Right down to the colors coming off the craft, where they were driving, when they stopped, that she tried to get out of the car, that there was other cars in the road. And they say, "We've already investigated this, and we've determined that what you saw was just a brightly lit circus tent." And the Taylors are like, "No, nope, we know what we saw. It was not a circus tent." And the cops just say, "All right then." And they walk out of the house and they leave. So they never actually filed a report. They never said anything. The police told them everything. They never said anything. So about a week goes by, and they see a story in the local paper about this UFO. And they think, oh, one of the other people who were on the road, or the other cars you saw, must have reported it, and they're doing a story about it. So they read the story, and the story is their account, told by them. Now, they never gave the police a report. Like I said, the police told them what happened. They never called the media. They never called the newspaper. They never told their friends. Someone else gave their story out. And they're guessing it was these cops who most likely, now they're thinking about it, weren't cops at all. So now they're getting absolutely mobbed at their home by media, by UFO investigators. Just anybody and everybody is on their property trying to get a quote, trying to get an interview, trying to get a picture. Where were they? Did you see the aliens? All this stuff. And they're freaking out because they don't want anything to do with this. They didn't want to tell anybody in the first place. All of a sudden, black Cadillac pulls up. These men in black get out and they flash some falsified IDs from the Great Britain Ministry of Defense. They walk into the home. They pull Peter aside and they tell him, stop talking about this. And he says, I 100% agree. I don't want anybody to know about this. I don't want anything to do with this. We never leaked the story. But it's kind of hard right now with all these people surrounding our house. And one of the men in black says, leave that to me. And he walks outside and he just looks at everybody and he says, go somewhere else. And all these people super eager to hear about the UFO incident, to get their interview, to get a picture, just to get anything. All these people, they're there. This man in black says, go somewhere else. And they all just go, oh, okay. They get in their cars and off they go. Man in black goes back inside and he said, we need all the information you have. And now this couple, they're like, yeah, whatever. We'll tell you whatever you want. You take the information and you go. So they get the information and they leave. But it's weird because it's like there was two different groups of them. There were these people impersonating officers who kind of intimidated them by leaking their story. And then there's these other ones that come in. It's like they're playing good cop, bad cop. Are they two different factions of Men in Black, or are they Men in Black and something else? Really, really weird. And then this story I have heard, and this is probably the better known of the Men in Black threat stories that I've heard of. And you may have heard of this one before. I've heard this on different videos. I've heard it in other podcasts. It's just really bizarre. And this one is pretty dark. So this one is 1976. Dr. Herbert Hopkins. He was a UFO investigator and a hypnotherapist. He was working with a patient in Maine about their UFO encounters. One night, he gets a call from another investigator. Again, this is very common. I'm a UFO investigator. I'd like to talk to you about what you're doing, right? So this investigator says, I'd like to sit down with you. I'm in town. I'd like to get together, compare notes. I've got some investigations. Maybe we can help each other get to the bottom of this. And Hopkins agrees. He's like, yeah, if you're in town, come on over. Gives him his address, hangs up the phone, walks 10 feet to the door to turn on the light so the guy can find his porch, and boop, the guy's standing on the porch already. This is 76. There's no cell phones. There's not even cordless phones at this point. And there's no phone on his porch. Where did this guy call from? So he's kind of taken aback immediately. And he opens the door, and there's this very odd gentleman standing there wearing, you guessed it, black suit, black jacket, black tie, starch white shirt, fedora, walks on in the house. And it's as he comes in and sits down and he takes off his hat that Hopkins realizes this guy is really bizarre. He says he has pale white, almost plasticky skin, like deathly white skin. No hair anywhere, no, like bald, but no eyebrows, no eyelashes, no stubble, nothing. And weirder yet, his lips, they're painted on. They look like they're painted. They're like really bright red, while the rest of them is just like pale. And in fact, a little while into the interview, this man in black kind of reaches up and wipes his mouth and rubs, like, smears his lips. It was clearly they were painted on. This really freaks Hopkins out. And it's not enough. It's weird. It's like this control factor that they have. He continues with his interview. And after a while of talking, the MIB, the Men in Black, he looks at Hopkins and he says, you have 2 coins in your pocket. Which he does. And kind of reaching, he's like, oh yeah, I do have 2 coins in my pocket. And the MIB says, take one out, place it in your hand, and pay very close attention to it. And this is where it starts getting really dark. So he does. He puts it in his hand, he looks at it, and he says that it started to change color. And then it got kind of blurry, and then it just kind of dissolved into nothing and disappeared. And he's just kind of in shock looking at his empty hand now, and he's like, what kind of magic trick was this? And the Man in Black asks if he knows who Barney Hill was, which he does. He's an investigator. Barney Hill and his wife Betty were one of the first, if not the first, reported case of an alien abduction. And the Man in Black says, you know, he just recently died. And Hopkins says, I heard that, yeah. And the Man in Black says, he died because he had no heart, just like you now have no coin. Insinuating that he needs to destroy all of his evidence, Hopkins does, or they're going to kill him too. Like, they killed Barney Hill by making his heart vanish out of his body. Barney Hill did die of cardiac arrest or of a heart issue of some kind. The Man in Black then says his energy is running low, oddly gets up, struggles to get to the door, walks down the driveway, and then disappears into a blue light. Some of these things, and there's a segment in this book about John Keel, and if you're not familiar with John Keel, I'll probably go into some of his stuff at some point. But John Keel talked about this kind of weird thing that happens around the phenomenon, and he calls it high strangeness. And this is what high strangeness is all about. Just things that happen that are so bizarre that when they're happening, you don't really realize it's weird. And then it's when you try to explain it to somebody and you're like, oh yeah, he walked in and all of a sudden he just vanished into a blue light. And people are like, are you nuts? And I talked about this last week. I talked about the greater phenomenon, that it's almost like it needs to keep you kind of credible, but also a little bit discredited. Like, it thrives on that chaotic energy of disbelief and wonder. And it's this kind of thing that generates that. Now, that's pretty dark. Being threatened by a Man in Black, saying that he's going to make your heart disappear. But they're not all that dark. Not all of them are that dark. So this last one, kind of another side of Men in Black stories. And there's a lot of stories like this. But this one's Colorado, 1967. The witness just goes by the name Mrs. B. She had recently had a UFO sighting, and she gets the visit from the Men in Black. Although this one knows all about the sighting. Really doesn't have a lot of questions. Basically tells her what she saw. Knows everything about it. Even things that she didn't even say out loud to herself. Just knows it all. And then is kind of looking around her house. And she's got this big, like, home library. And the Men in Black just kind of oddly admits, looks at the books and says, I'm illiterate. I can't read any of these. And then says, but if you take any of these books and ask me, I can tell you what the content is. But she goes, well, that's weird. And he keeps looking around the house, and he gets to her kitchen. And he's like really put off, very upset with how well stocked her kitchen is. And he just says that humans waste too much time and effort on food. And something to the effect of they should just get their nourishment from the air or something like that. Well, that's a weird thing to say too. And all these things are designed to kind of take the witness by surprise, leave them kind of reeling. And then as he's looking around, he comes across this painting that she made of her UFO sighting. And he offers to buy it. I want to buy this, he says. So she sets pretty high price on it. Well, it's going to cost you this much. And the Men in Black's just kind of like, oh, I don't have any money. Okay, have a good day then. And just leaves. And there's a lot of stories like this. And that's it. That's the whole thing. It's just, they come in, they threaten you or say some weird stuff, and then they leave. And I'll see if I can find, some of these are just bizarre. Like they don't know, they ask for snacks and they don't know, like you hand them a glass of water and they don't know what to do with it. They just kind of look at it, or just really weird kind of interactions like that. So I'll see if I can find more of these kind of crazy stories about Men in Black. Ones that maybe aren't so dark, because there's a lot of them out there. But let me know. Have you ever had a Men in Black encounter? Or something that could be Men in Black? Now, there's stories that are in that book that I didn't touch on, and other ones that I've heard, that the Men in Black aren't necessarily wearing black. And that first encounter where in the dream or in the out-of-body experience, they told that guy that they sometimes wear other people as disguises. It's like the police officers in one story I talked about, where they may be just being used by the Men in Black, being possessed by them. What are these things? So have you ever had a weird experience, thought you saw something and then had something weird like that happen? Let me know. podcast@primitiveintelligence.com. I'd love to hear it. So I hope you guys enjoyed these kind of creepy stories. I still think the black-eyed kids are creepier, but that's my opinion. But let me know what you think about that. Hope you guys enjoyed it. That's going to do it for me for this episode. Enjoy the rest of your week. See ya.